Everybody, welcome to another Talk Photography, and today we're with Marko Dutka. Marko, hi bud, how are you doing?
Good, thanks, Mark. Thanks very much for this evening.
Oh, pleasure. It's great to have you back again. I think you've done a few of these for us and things, really. Marko, before we get into your 8 images to actually talk about tonight, if you can just bring us up to speed on who you are and what you do and your kind of speciality, and let's have a kind of a quick chat before we get into the images. So how did you first get into photography?
Well, I originally was a marine biologist years and years ago. I did a degree in marine biology, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And I eventually made my way back to art college, where I was doing painting and sculpture. And then I picked up a camera quite by accident, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I've been a photographer now for around about 25 years. I've done everything from photojournalism through to editorial work. I ran a studio in Bath, a portrait studio, done loads and loads of wedding photography. And, you know, I've done a lot of fashion work, a lot of commercial work. And at present, I'm actually doing a PhD at the University of Gloucestershire. So yeah, so it's been quite a sort of a long and convoluted career.
And as far as when you kind of made the transition from one thing to another, what was the catalyst? How did you jump, as it were?
I think sometimes it was jumping before I was pushed. I did a lot of photojournalism, and the market really, you could see it was actually really just diminishing very rapidly. So I was very fortunate. I knew somebody who she was getting married, and she loved my kind of photographic style. So she asked me if I would photograph her wedding. And I said, well, I'll do it, but I won't do it this way. She said, no, that's exactly what I want. And in those days, this was well before people, you know, everything was very kind of posed and very static. And I wasn't going to do that. And I told her I'd be really expensive. She said, don't worry about it. I'm marrying a lord. So I thought, oh, this is nice. So I kind of got into wedding photography on that basis. And people saw the work, and it got into lots of magazines. And I was just inundated with lots of people who wanted me to do their weddings in that particular style. And then I moved from weddings because it really, again, it one of those markets that it suddenly became ultra competitive when digital came in. So I moved into the portrait studio. And that was, I ran that for 10 years. And then a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to do my own work, which I'd always done anyway. So I've been concentrating on doing my own fine art work. And that has led me to doing my present position, which is I'm an academic researcher at the University of Gloucestershire, which is essentially, hopefully at the end of it, I'll have a PhD doctorate.
And is that what your PhD is going to be in?
It'll be in photography, yeah. So I will actually be technically a doctor, but whatever you do, if you're on a plane and you need a doctor, do not call me, because I won't be able to help you medically. I'll be able to tell all about photography as you breathe your last, but there'll be absolutely no medical assistance whatsoever.
I think it's gonna be a while since till I'm on a plane, so again, I'll be okay. I don't know why I'm just not going abroad for a minute. And I'm not sure if this is an in joke, and I've asked her already, but somebody said photography on Man City. Is that an in joke that you know of, or is that somebody saying?
Yes, somebody knows me well. I have one of my ultra vices is I am actually from Moss Side in Manchester, and I was born around about 3/4 of a mile from what was then Man City's ground, which is Main Road. And I have been a Man City supporter, despite all of my friends in Manchester being United fans. And I have been one for as long as I've been around, as long as I can remember. And obviously, for a considerable portion of that time, with regard to United, it's been quite painful. But certainly over the last 12 years, I have to say, it's been actually rather enjoyable. So loud and proud, noisy neighbour, I'm afraid.
Very good. So well done, Rebecca, on that one. You got the inside scoop that I didn't, kind of thing on it. But
I know
look,
who that is.
let's have a look at the first photograph, shall we? And we'll kick off tonight. Remember, questions as you go, guys. And we'll obviously finish off the questions at the end, but let's talk about each image we'll go in. So the first image is the guy with the weights.
Yeah. So this one is called Rambo. And the reason it's called Rambo is because that was this particular gentleman's nickname. Because it was taken in the sort of 90s, not too long after the initial Rambo films came out, with obviously with Sylvester Stallone. And obviously he's a weightlifter, so he's very well built, and he's got that slightly kind of, Sylvester Stallone look. So it didn't take very much for them to actually kind of call him Rambo on that basis. His actual name is Andrew, and he's a really, really lovely gentleman. Now, this is what they described as a hardcore gym in Falmouth, and that's where I used to live. And I'd finished college, and I was trying to kind of set up myself with a portfolio and start to get clients and build up a business. And I wanted to do a lot of documentary work and editorial work, so I was building a portfolio for that. And I was doing various sort of personal projects, really. So I was photographing something called the Falmouth Marine Band, and I was photographing in a nightclub in Falmouth, and this was this particular gym. And I went down there, and it wasn't anything official. It was a gym run by this wonderful gentleman called Danny, who was from Northern Ireland. He was absolutely huge, but a real gentleman, real gentle giant. And he basically he just set up an old sail loft with lots and lots of weightlifting equipment. And then there was a group of blokes who went down there, and they all decided to kind of, do weight training. And they were really, really, really serious about it. It wasn't something that you did, as a hobby. They were really, really, really passionate and keen about it. So I went down there, and obviously I'm only 5'6", so these guys towered over me. They were massive compared to me. But they were really nice to me, and really, I could go in there and chat with them. And I was very interested in why they did it, as well as what they did. And instead of just trying to record it, I was interested in the personalities and the motivations as to why they would, because they spent a long time in those gyms, and they really, really exercised. And you need a lot of commitment and dedication to be able to do that. So I was interested in why they did that. And I produced a series of photographs of this particular gym, to be able to kind of develop the portfolio. And one of the things that I was interested in was that Rambo, or Andrew, he came across as actually a really sensitive, very gentle person. And it wasn't the kind of, he didn't have the swagger that you might assume that a bodybuilder would have. He was actually really quite laid back and quite sensitive. And I was always interested in why he would do it. And very often you'll find that people who are so dedicated to something like this are doing it because they're trying to kind of surmount something. So it might, for example, have been bullying when they were kids or something like that. So the reason I kind of photographed it like that was, obviously there was the aesthetic, quality of it. I wanted to have all those triangles in there and use the shapes of the weights and so on. But at the same time, I also wanted that weight to almost appear to be like a shield for him, because so essentially it was suggesting that what he was doing was kind of building a new life and building a new kind of identity through what he did. And he actually became very successful at it. And he was actually Mr. Cornwall. About 3 or 4 years after this, he carried on with the weight building and became Mr. Cornwall. And one of the really useful things about it for me was that obviously these guys were very broad and very big and very strong, and lots of them worked as bouncers in the 2 or 3 nightclubs that Falmouth had. And I was working in a bar at the time, so we always managed to kind of get free access to the pubs, to the clubs rather, because we finished late. But because I knew all the guys on the door, they would just whisk me in. I didn't have to wait in the queues. They just said, "Oh, Marko, come in, mate, not a problem." And I'm sure all these people would look at me and we used to wonder how come I was just be able to whisk my way in. But it was very, very useful to know lots and lots of really big gentlemen. And when you're my size, it's actually a very useful talent to have that. So that was really nice. In terms of the actual technical side of it, this was shot on film. So it's a long time ago, and it was shot, and I can't remember whether it was Kodak T-Max or Kodak Tri-X, but it was basically a really innovative film that Kodak brought out pre-digital, and it had an ISO of 800. Now, when you say that, in those days, that was remarkable. Digitally, obviously, as you're probably very aware, the ISOs that we can use now are extraordinary, and you still get fantastic results without any kind of artifact in the actual images. But the Kodak T-Max, I think it actually was, you had to push process it to get it to 800, and you also had the capacity to push process it to 1600. But what you did get was a very, very grainy image, and if that was a larger image, you'd see just how grainy it actually is. And obviously it had to be hand printed and so on. So it was actually a lot more complicated to produce something like that. And the technique I used, I basically used a single flash just on a lead off the camera hot shoe, just to one side, and I lit Andrew with it. And then I had it on a tripod, on my camera on a tripod, and then I let it burn in for about a second or so afterwards. And that's where you get all the kind of environment, the ambience in the background. You get the idea of the kind of where the space that they're in, and hopefully some idea of what the environment was like. And the other thing as well is obviously you can see the gentleman in the middle distance is actually blurred because he's obviously doing weightlifting. And I was very, very pleased with the whole set of images that I got from there. And I submitted them to the Royal Photographic Society for their international print show. And at the time, I was also working as a custodian at a place called Pendennis Castle. And it was a great little job, but it was one of those jobs that wasn't really going to go anywhere, especially with the photography. So I would often kind of get quite frustrated. And I got a letter back one morning from the RPS, and I opened it, and it basically I'd submitted 4 images, and the first 3 were it hasn't been accepted, hasn't been accepted, hasn't been accepted. And by this point I thought, oh, I've got to go to work, I can't be bothered with this. So I went off to work, and I spent most of the day in a bad mood, if the truth be told. And when I got back home, one of my lovely flatmates turned around and said, oh, congratulations. And I said, what have I done now? He said, oh, you got into the RPS. And I said, no, I haven't. They've rejected it. And they said they didn't reject the last one, of course, which is the page I hadn't actually read. So they'd actually accepted it. And it was just it really gave me so much confidence and support that at long last, somebody somewhere of merit had actually, validated my work. And that was a fantastic experience. And I learned 2 things from it. One is that you have to have lots of creative resilience when you're a photographer, because you will have lots and lots of times when you'll get successes, and you'll have lots of times when you'll get knockbacks. And over a 25-year period, I've had a lot of both, and it's just part and parcel of what happens. And the other thing to learn is that when somebody sends you a letter, read all of it, because that might mean that you'd spend your day in a good mood rather than a bad mood. So
very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Couple of questions coming through. Somebody's, in fact, you've touched on a few things here. Black and white film. Do you think that's a good idea to kickstart a project in this digital time?
I love black and white, and in those days, my intended market for this work was the Independent magazine, because they set up so that they were specifically black and white photography, and they only lasted so long doing that, unfortunately. But I love black and white. It is my first love. And in those days as well, because I had my own darkroom, I was taking the photographs, processing the film, printing the film. I could do all of that, whereas I didn't have the facilities or quite honestly, the finances to be able to do similar thing in colour. Nowadays, my PhD work has a very dramatic change. It's gone from completely black and white to completely colour. And in fact, colour is absolutely paramount to my latest work. I probably will at some point go back to black and white, but at the moment, you know, it's not something I'm in slightly interested. But certainly, you know, with this particular project, I feel that the graininess and the grittiness of the images and the black and white character actually fitted the subject matter really well. And whether it's color or black and white only matters if it actually fits the subject matter of what you're photographing.
Okay, so to summarize, good idea to actually do a personal project in black and white film, or a stick on the digital route?
I would certainly do personal projects. As to whether I would be as specific and say black and white or color, okay, it depends on the subject that you're photographing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody's just completed what they're classing as phase 1 of their project, and they want to do something with it. Any advice?
You need to get people to see your work. So that is actually the hardest bit. You know, it's going to be very difficult to get those photographs seen. And that is where you have to be very resourceful and very, very determined. Initially, I would enter that work for as many decent competitions as you possibly can. Get it out there, get it seen. Things like the RPS, the Lucy Awards are great because they give you feedback on your panels that you submit. There are 1 or 2 competitions where there's very obviously there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of photographers out there these days, and there are a number of organizations who see that as a really good way of harvesting material. And obviously the high finances, everybody wants to get their work seen, and you want to be careful who you send your work to. So I would initially anyway try to get your work seen by people like the RPS, try and get it seen by people in places like the MPA, the BIPP, or the societies, because people will give you feedback on your work in those organizations. I know with the societies, for example, that you can get critique and mentorship from them as part of a membership program. And I believe it as well with Mark, you actually do a critique as well. So you can submit work for that. And you've just got to get the work out there, whatever way you can. And once people start to see your work, if it kind of floats their boat, they will start to help you. So it's a case of get it out there, get people to see it, and join organizations that will actually allow you to interact with people.
On a personal level, I'd recommend that you go and see your picture editor in a local newspaper. Submit, even if you can't go and see them, submit them digitally. Tell them a little bit about the project and everything else, especially with online news nowadays. They're always looking for different things. Even if so if you're going to be doing that, the first thing I would do is prepare your images to make sure they're visible somewhere, like on a dedicated web page, your Instagram page, wherever it is, but to do with that. But I'd also recommend that you're contacting them. Once you've done that, just contact them. You know, it's just not about the world of professional photography and organizations. It's about the world of photography, which is much bigger than any organization can ever be. So if you're truly in the world of photography, to get seen, you need to talk to people, and local news, television, radio. Even though we're a visual, you think, why am I going to get in touch with a radio? Because they will actually feature it on the airways. You might get an interview. They'll also feature it on the likes of their website or Instagram or whatever it would be as well. So the diversification is absolutely key. But one thing, if you're going to be doing that, make sure you've got your copyright information attached to each image, and there's a copyright actually on the image as well with it, things ready to make sure it's being controlled. But yeah, so kind of different ways. So well done on, if this is the first stage of your project that you've created, anybody, you know, don't just let it sit on a drive. Just don't sit on your kind of computer. As Marko said, get it seen. Marko, image 2.
Okay, so this is the model's name is Frankie, and this was photographed. Initially, it was going to be a personal project, but it actually led to a considerable amount of opportunity for me. So again, referring to that second question, if you get your work out there, you get it seen by the right people, it will open doors if it's something that actually kind of interests and excites people. So this particular image was originally going to be a personal project because I was interested in doing fashion work. My partner was a fantastic artist and a lecturer, and she also designed clothing. So she actually designed the costume and actually physically made that costume that the model is wearing. And we photographed it at a place called Golden Hall in Bristol, which is the most amazing Georgian house. It's actually a student hall of residence. Bristol's in the sort of top 5 in terms of universities in the UK. And so it's quite a posh university. And this student hall of residence is an absolutely amazing place. And it's this Georgian house, but it has beautiful wood paneling throughout the actual house, these amazing mantelpieces and fireplaces, wood carvings. It has statues throughout the ground. It's got a grotto, a water tower, Italian sunken garden, and it was just a fabulous place. And I contacted them and said, is there any chance that I can photograph in the grounds? And they said, not a problem, absolutely fantastic. They were absolutely brilliant, really, really nice. And they just asked if I could do a little bit of photography for them, for a little bit of PR for them. And I said, that's brilliant. What a fantastic kind of exchange of skills. So I photographed down at the Golden Hall, and we did a whole day long shoot there. Absolutely fabulous place. This particular image is shot using something called key shifting. So what I've done with it is I've exposed, I've lit the model with a flash to one side, so it's got Rembrandt lighting on her, and I've exposed for the flash, which is about a stop brighter than the actual background. And what that means is that she becomes perfectly exposed, but the background becomes a little bit darker, a bit more saturated. And it's a really useful technique for doing things like weddings, if you want to get, for example, detail in a background, or if you want to get a bit more saturation in the actual image, or you want to get a little bit more blue in a sky, for example. So it's a really, really useful technique. And I showed the Golden Hall these particular images, and they were really wowed with them, and they thought they really loved them. And then I got a phone call from them saying, look, every year we do this wonderful Golden Ball, and it's basically a student end of year party. And it is just one of the most incredible venues to do something like that. And they get really, really top name artists appearing there. And so they've had Jules Holland and Pee Wee Herman and Dizzy Rascal and so on. And they said, look, would you be able to, could we use this image for, or one of these images for our Golden Hall poster? And I said, of course, yeah, that'd be brilliant. So they did. And they said, in return, what we'd like to do is we'd like to give you some tickets for the Golden Ball. Now, these are just so difficult to get hold of. It is a really, really, really well respected venue and event. And they offered me 4 tickets, and I just bit their hand off. I thought, brilliant. And they loved the image. And then they contacted me again and said, would you do this for us every year in exchange for tickets? And I went, yes, please. So every year I would go and see top of the range acts, and myself and my partner Nikki would go along, and we got very popular around about May time with our friends, because they all knew that there were all my friends knew there were 2 tickets going spare in June for the Golden Ball. So we got very, very popular, and we went to them. We did it for about 10 years, and it was fabulous. I actually really enjoyed doing the shoots for them. And obviously you know, it was free champagne and a black tie dinner, the bands, and lots of other things as well in the most beautiful of venues. So I love doing that. It also, again, it was actually included in another Royal Photographic Society International Print Show, and somebody saw the picture there, and they contacted me via the RPS, and they asked me if I would be interested in doing a fashion shoot, and I said yes, please. So I did a fashion shoot. So it's about getting the work out. Just to refer to that previous question, you need to get that work out there, and you can't always tell exactly where it's going to work and not work, but you have to get it out there whatever way you can. And I got a paid fashion shoot from it, and then that led to a portfolio, and somebody else got me for something else, and it just snowballed from there. I ended up doing lots of work for people like Dents. So I did all their catalogues and so on. I did a lot of work for Vivienne Westwood, and it was just lovely. And I was photographing all these beautiful models and all sorts of things, and just having a whale of a time, calling everybody darling, and you know, all that kind of thing. And you know, it all stemmed initially anyway from this particular image.
Brilliant. Questions on techie stuff. Equipment that is your favorite lens at present?
Well, at present, I'm actually using for my landscape work a Pentax 645Z, which is a medium format digital camera. I have looked into and have used analog 5x4 cameras as well for this particular project, but I can do things with a digital, not so much in terms of post-production, because I don't actually do an awful lot of post-production on my imagery, but I can, for example, multiple layer images after I've taken them. So a lot of the work I do is actually sometimes going to be 50, 60 images, which I then put through a software program which combines them all together. I couldn't do that with analog, just simply couldn't do that. So that's why I use digital for that reason rather than analog. And previous to that, I have used Canon lenses for years and years and years, and I had a Canon 5D Mark IV for an awful lot of the work that you'll see tonight. And I think this one was a Canon EOS Mark I, I think it was, which I've still got and I still occasionally use. Lenses, I have got two zoom lenses in terms of the Canon, and all the Pentax lenses are all prime lenses. And I've got a 35mm, a 50mm, a 70mm, which is around about equivalent to a normal lens, the other two being wide angle, and then a 120mm lens as well, but all prime for the landscape work.
Great, thank you. Next image. So
again, this is a continuation of the fashion work. I started getting lots of work from quite small designers, and you know, they would range from people who did sort of very individual handmade dresses and you know, clothes, through to, you know, companies like for example, I did a lot of work for Vivienne Westwood in Cardiff, and Dents, who are a big international company, did a lot of brochure work for them, and various other people. And I had a really, really lovely blend of photography coming in, and it was really interesting to do. And you know, I did everything from social work to weddings and to fashion work. And I also did a lot of work with a magazine called Bath Magazine, which was obviously in Bath, and that they commissioned me over, I think, about a 2 to 3 year period to do a series of fashion shoots for them. Now, they didn't actually pay, but I wasn't too fussed about that, because A, it got my work out to a very large audience. B, it meant that because they had the contacts, I could get access to exactly the designers and the retailers that I wanted to, and I could also get access to the most fantastic locations. I would never have been able to do that on my own. And I also had people who would work as a stylist for me, hairstylists, makeup artists. So I had this massive resource base, because I had that link. And obviously the work got out there, so people saw it, they contacted me, I got more work of that nature. And it actually has led to a lot of other work that wasn't necessarily fashion. So for example, we did a fashion shoot at the Bath Thermae Spa, which is the wonderful, you know, the natural spring baths in Bath itself. And they loved the work, and they then commissioned me for about 6 years to do all their commercial photography. So again, it was so commercially viable to do this work. And they also, the Bath magazine also were very generous, because they always used to give me every month that I did a fashion shoot, I would also get a 2-page spread, and which was obviously an advert, and I would advertise my latest kind of, you know, my portrait studio's latest offer or style of photography or project that I was doing. And it led to a tremendous amount of work, of the kind of work that I wanted to do. It wasn't just general, you know, here's a kind of portrait session, we want to do this. I wanted to do very specific work, so that the portraiture and the studio didn't become a drudge. It actually became somewhere that I could be as creative as possible. And that brought me in a lovely kind of client base. And once you start getting that kind of client base, they tell their friends, you're doing something individual, you're doing something different. People come back to you because they want you to do that style of photography. And so it was really creatively satisfying, and actually financially satisfying as well.
Good. And there's a couple of questions. You touched on finance there. I'll jump ahead, or jump backwards. Per personal project, should I be looking to get them funded by the arts councils, or should there be a way for me to help finance a project?
Getting work from the Arts Council is going to be exceptionally hard work. First of all, there are lots and lots of people applying for grants, and one of the criteria for Arts Council funding is something called impact. And what they want to do is they're not particularly keen on funding a project because it's aesthetically pleasing, or they want, what impact is this going to have on the lives of people who will view this? What is your audience going to be? Who is going to see this work? How will it impact on their lives? So if your project is something that you feel can be used to do that, that is going to be one of the criteria the Arts Council will look at. But it is intensely competitive, and you will need to be able to kind of really back up your work with a really good proposal. And you'll also need to have a pretty good CV, because the Arts Council, as I said, it's immensely competitive. I'll talk about another project slightly later on where I actually got funding from the HLF, the Heritage Lottery Fund, precisely because of impact. So hopefully I'll be able to explain a little bit more and won't be duplicating what I'm actually saying now. But it is, you'll need to try and find as many ways as possible to fund that work. And unfortunately, there isn't as much funding out there nowadays as there used to be, and it's a lot more competitive trying to get it. It's not to say that you can't get it and that you shouldn't try, but it is a long slog.
And today, you know, whereas years ago, I'm sure Kodak and Ilford and the likes of had a request every second of the day for free film to do with projects. In this world of digital nowadays,
yeah,
realistically, what are you funding? You're going to be funding travel, you're going to be funding accommodation, you're going to be funding the exhibition, and people are going to find it very, very hard to actually put money where the mouths are, especially in today. Without seeing, as Marko was saying, that kind of back catalogue of what you've been doing. But the great thing about, you know, you is that you don't need to please anybody when you self-project things. You're pleasing yourself, and that is a really great way to actually walk out of your door with a camera and take photographs, you know. And if you've got a plan, you can actually go ahead and actually do it and things, you know, without worrying about what others are trying to do with you. As soon as you try and get funding of some course, you're going to find that they're going to be wanting blood in some way, and they're going to want to see results ASAP for the return on their budgets and everything else with it and things. And I would just recommend that don't let money put you off from doing something, but start small and really kind of move it on from there and things really.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions going through, but sorry, Marko, go ahead.
No, may I just go back to the previous one? It's just a couple of things. I actually had a complaint. This was actually used as the front cover for the magazine. One of the things I was trying to do with the pictures and the way that I was posing the models, I wanted to kind of break away from. It still happens a lot, but you know, especially at Christmas, we get inundated with these adverts for perfumes, and they're very, very melodramatic, and they've got people dressed as Roman gods, and they're in these incredibly, quite honestly, silly poses, and you know they're very funny, but I can't take them seriously. And what I wanted to do with my style of photography is I didn't want to do that kind of melodramatic look. I wanted to have a dramatic look to my pictures, but I didn't want that melodramatic look. I didn't want it to look, shall we say, cheesy. So I was very careful about how I was actually going to pose the models that I photographed. And I actually got a complaint because the structure that she's photographed against is actually a grade 2 listed structure. And it's actually a Victorian toilet wall. And it's actually in a place called Sydney Gardens in Bath. And as I said, it's grade 2 listed. But lots of people wrote into Bath magazine and complained about the fact that I'd photographed somebody next to a toilet wall. Now, I don't know how many of you have realized what it was until now, but I just thought it was a fantastic backdrop. But, you know, I had a certain amount of notoriety at the time because I'd done this particular picture. And I'm still scratching my head as to why anybody would be offended by it. Oh, by the way, because I was able to incorporate the word cheese into this talk, I've just won a bet, and Nigel owes me a pint. And I think Nigel should be listening right now, so he's probably killing himself laughing. Sorry about that.
Thank you for cheese. That's okay with it. Great. Next image, which doesn't have cheese.
No cheese in this one. This is a picture. I was commissioned by, this was actually Arts Council funded. And I was approached by somebody who'd seen some of the previous fashion work. And they said, you know, they would like to commission me to do a project where they were utilizing a space in Milton Keynes in there's a big sort of not supermarket, but a sort of shopping mall there, and it had a very, very large white wall, and they never knew what to do with it. And the Arts Council came along and said, well, why don't you use it for exhibition space? So that's exactly what they did, and the owners of the shopping mall decided it was a really good idea, and they commissioned 6 artists to fill the space. And one of them was my partner, Nikki. She'd done some amazing work using pins and scalpel blades and lace. And then I did a project, and it was called Portrait of Genius. And this is a wonderful lady called Daphne Self. And Daphne is, at this time, I think she was in her mid-80s. She's now probably in her mid-90s now, and she is a force of nature. And she turned up at our shoot, and she just, in the nicest possible way, ran us ragged. She wouldn't stop until the image was perfect. And I'm like that. I'm a perfectionist. I want to get things absolutely right. But she was amazing, absolutely amazing. She was with Models One. I think she's still with Models One. And you'll have seen Daphne in lots and lots and lots of television, you know, photography. She's been photographed by Mario Testino, David Bailey, Rankin, you you name it, she's probably been photographed by them all. And she had a book out a while ago about her life, and she said that her three favorite photographers were Mario Testino, Rankin, and Marko Dutka. And I have to say that was just immensely flattering and probably completely bonkers, but very lovely. And I've never get I always take the opportunity to name drop when it comes around to that. But this particular project was called Portrait of Genius for a very odd reason, because, and please don't take offense, there is no such thing, and there can't be, a female genius. Now, I know that there's probably a lot of women who are going, what's he talking about? Genius actually is from a Roman term, and it's the same root as generation, and it's about reproduction. And basically the Romans and the Greeks believed that a great person was somebody who was able to continue their line, and that the quality of a child wasn't determined by the woman, it was determined by the man. So genius actually means great man, it's great generator. And the great generator, epistemologically, and that long word means it's actually about the study of words. Epistemologically, genius actually means man, it's a male term. It can't relate to women. Now, I know that's misogynistic. I'm pretty sure everybody else here knows that's misogynistic, but believe me, that's what it actually means. And it derives from something really, really, really bizarre. And believe me, this is not scientifically true. It's certainly not scientifically proven. But the Romans and the Greeks believed that sperm was generated in the brain of a man, and that it was transmitted to the woman, and that's why, therefore, the man was the generator. Obviously, it's complete and utter nonsense. But the whole concept of genius derives from that belief. So when I did this particular project, I wanted to look at the idea of what you would define as genius. And obviously, in the field that we work within, the typical genius is painter. You know, he's the old master. And it's a term of reverence. It's a term, it denotes wisdom, it denotes character, it denotes success. It denotes somebody who is above and beyond the ordinary. If you turn that name and old master and feminize it, and it becomes old mistress, can you see how insulting it becomes? Simply because it's been feminized. So in order to discuss that, what I wanted to do was actually produce a series of portraits of Daphne, and we found 9 images, 9 paintings by this one, for example, is actually based on a Rembrandt self-portrait. There's a Titian, there's a Caravaggio, a Van Dyck, a Van Eyck, and I basically reproduced them, but instead of using an old master, I used an old mistress. And all the clothing is contemporary, so none of it is, you know, it's not costume, it is actually a fashion shoot. And they were printed absolutely huge, and then they were displayed in the center. It actually got featured in the Guardian, which was fantastic. And what I also did with them, I've seen a lot of photography where people have mimicked paintings by old masters, and it's fairly obvious sometimes that people have done that from a magazine or from a reproduction, because they're quite flat images, they're quite graphic images. If you go and look at images like that Rembrandt, they're actually almost 3-dimensional. They have lots and lots of paint put onto them, and particularly in areas of highlight, the paint is there for a particular reason. It's to create catch lights. And when the old masters painted these paintings, they didn't just paint that surface. They underpainted, and they would very often paint the picture almost like a kind of green, because that would show through the layers of translucent paint they put on top of it. So when I came to actually produce these images, I would actually take the image and I would turn it into a kind of olive or a green or an ochre, and then I would layer it in the image, and I'd sharpen areas of it and blur out other areas of the image, so that it had, when you looked at it closely, it was actually going to look far more like an oil painting actually would do in real life. So it was something that I kind of wanted to investigate, and I think it came about because obviously I'd gone to college to go there as a painter and a sculptor, and I'd obviously, that is still very much part of what I do. It's still part of what I want to produce with my work. But obviously I'm a photographer and I want to incorporate that into that work. The other useful thing about this one was that obviously it got lots and lots of coverage. And going back to the pretty eccentric image, which was, let me think, sorry, for the Bath magazine, I put this into Bath magazine, and I got inundated with people wanting to have portraits done exactly like this. So commercially, again, it ended up really, really useful.
Very good. Love that image, by the way. Marko, we're running out of time, so we do need, if we're going to get through the 8 images, can you talk to us about this image?
So this is a portrait of a fantastic musician. I'm sure a lot of people will recognize him. It's Rick Wakeman, and he was obviously the keyboardist with Yes, but he is on so much of modern pop music. So he played on Morning Has Broken, he played the piano, he's played with David Bowie on things like Life on Mars, and I photographed him quite a number of times, and I've actually got to know him really well, and we have a lovely mutual connection, because as Rebecca pointed out earlier on, I'm not the only Man City fan in the world, so is Rick. So whenever we do meet up and have a chat and so on, we will always discuss Man City. That's our first kind of port of call conversation-wise. This was shot again for Bath Abbey, because he came to perform there. And actually, the technique is exactly the same technique as I used for the original picture, Rambo, where he's lit with a flash to one side, and then I've let the background burn in. But I've been able to control the exposure so you still get detail in the stained glass window in the background. It's originally shot in color, but actually it's been transformed into a black and white. And I wanted to have, his work has got a lot of historical context to it. He's a classically trained pianist. And his work, for example, he's got albums, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, The Legend of King Arthur. So he has got a historical context. So it seemed like a perfect environment to photograph him in. And if you notice as well, he's got extraordinarily long fingers, which is something that I wanted to kind of put into the narrative of the picture. So yeah, again, the aesthetics were based upon trying to create a portrait and about what he did as well as who he was.
Guys, I will ask all the questions tonight, I promise you, okay? We're just going to get through the images, and then we'll actually ask them as soon as we've kind of got through the photographs.
So
the graveyard.
This is a portrait of what's called Sailor's Corner in a cemetery called Arnos Vale. And I was inspired by the Lawrence Binyon poem, The Going Down of the Sun. And it basically talks about remembering people when the sun goes down. And I took that quite literally and thought, well, why don't I photograph all the Commonwealth war graves at night, do nocturnal projects all about those graves and war memorials and so on. And it tied in with the commemoration of the end of the First World War. And it actually became a major exhibition at Bristol Cathedral. And it again led to lots and lots of things. And via the cathedral, and because of my track record and my CV, I was able to get Heritage Lottery funding for this, and I got considerable funding for it. And I also started working with the Royal British Legion, Commonwealth War Graves Commission, you know, and the ball started rolling because of that, and because Bristol Cathedral was so supportive. But it actually started out as a personal project, as a pilot project at least. And I approached a cemetery in Bristol called Arnos Vale, which is one of the original kind of big municipal cemeteries. And I kind of contacted their education officer and sort of very naively said, is there any chance that I could wander around your graveyard at night taking photographs? And they went, what a brilliant idea. Yes, please, we'd love to do that. So I did the pilot project, knew that I had a project that was worthwhile doing, and I approached Bath City Council, various other councils and lots of other people, and it just took off. And as I said, the actual final exhibition was at Bristol Cathedral, and we used the cathedral as an installation space. It was absolutely a remarkable place to do it in. And I believe alongside the kind of visitors that they actually have there were about 100,000 people who actually saw the exhibition, which for, you know, you want to get your work out there, you want your work seen. And it was actually a very good way of meeting the criteria for Heritage Lottery funding and the Arts Council funding that I got for it, because it had impact, because lots of people saw it and lots of people related to it. And I did quite a lot of education things with, there's something called the Living History Group, and also with various colleges in Bristol, where I did pinhole photography with students from various colleges, but in the Arnos Vale. So again, it was all about impact. It was getting people involved in the work. It was getting people to see the work, and not just saying, here's a great project, can I get funding for it? I had to provide impact. So going back to that original question, the person, if you want to get Arts Council funding, you will need to have impact. You will need to get people involved. That's what they're looking for. But as I say, this was a lovely project. I'm obviously not in the least bit superstitious, because obviously hanging around graveyards at night is probably not the most straightforward thing to do. But it was actually a lovely experience, because they are just such amazing venues, amazing places.
Very good.
Okay.
Again, a reminder that I will be asking the questions to Marko when we got through the images, guys. Marko, so the next image.
Yes, this image, I'm now working along the River Severn, and basically I work up to an area on the estuary called, was a town called Sharpness, and then the Bristol Channel part of the estuary as well. And I initially started photographing, it's a really strange river. It's not a tourist river. A lot of the rivers in the UK aren't. They are tributaries, they are byways, they are heavily industrialized and very often very neglected, and very often quite badly damaged by human intervention. And there is a lot of light pollution, habitat loss, there's lots and lots of pollution of the rivers, there's lots of waste pollution, lots of plastic pollution, and it can be quite, they are very bleak environments in places. This is actually a place called Seaview power station, and it's an incinerator power station. And the Severn tends to be the kind of area where a lot of industry goes to that supports our everyday lives, but isn't particularly photogenic or aesthetic in terms of contributing to our everyday lives. So there are, for example, I think 5 nuclear power stations. 2 of them, or 3 of them, are just about to be decommissioned, but they're building a brand new one, which is Hinkley Point C. You know, and there are areas of wasteland there which go on for miles and miles and miles. And there was one particular spot that I was photographing along, where I was photographing this particular incinerator power station, and it's just off a road where these lorries thunder down between Avonmouth and Severn Bridge, and the noise from them is just remarkable. You know, they really, these are juggernauts, and it's an incredibly bleak and incredibly environmentally neglected area. But really oddly, at one point when I was photographing there, because I had to take quite long exposures for images like this, I heard a nightingale singing, and it was just a real epiphany moment, because you've got these thundering lorries going down, and then between them there's a nightingale singing, and it has the most beautiful song. And it was just so strange and so odd to hear that beautiful lilting voice there amongst all of this. And I've since found out through a little bit of research, in actual fact, it shows that the environment is under considerable stress, because it's something called the Lombard effect. And what that basically is, that birds have to sing far louder and far longer to communicate, because of the noise that they have to contest with from what we do as a society. So this is a particular spot. It's fairly mundane in terms of as an environment, but I feel that it's the reality of the landscapes like this, that they're not all beautiful and aesthetic and gorgeous, and they're not all beautiful sunsets. That actually the reality of a lot of our landscape is exactly like this. And I wanted to kind of investigate that. And that led me on to the next image, which is part of my PhD. And this is a very long exposure, and it's the River Parrot in the foreground, with a line of pylons which go back to Hinkley Point C, or Hinkley Point A and B. And when they are decommissioned, they will be part of the national grid that comes from Hinkley Point C. And this is moonlit, and it's taken from a place called Sturt's Nature Reserve, which is a piece of the Severn Estuary, which has been breached. So what was actually originally a salt marsh was then drained and then used as agricultural land, and it's unsustainable to do that because it constantly floods. So what's actually now happened is the WWT, the World Wildfowl Trust, have actually breached the Severn, and it now regularly floods and is returning to a salt marsh. But it's still, although it's an area of scientific interest, special scientific interest, it's still under an enormous amount of pressure. So it is moonlight, but there's an enormous amount of light pollution, and light pollution is a form of habitat loss. So the Severn is losing large amounts of its population of birds, and it's already lost large amounts of population of elvers, which are baby eels, and the salmon industry has completely vanished. So I'm very interested in the interface between the humans and the natural world. And again, I haven't given thus far Greek philosophers a great deal of time, but there is a philosopher that his work I'm really, really interested in. He's called Heraclitus. He didn't produce an awful lot, but his basic theme is that the world is not static, that everything is a conflict between the positive and the negative, and that everything is in constant flux. And it really appealed to me, because I see landscapes not as static places, but as places that are constantly changing. And the idea is that you can never step into the same river twice. Clouds are changing all the time. The environment is changing. That river tidal is flowing, and it's particularly so with the Severn, because it's got a huge tidal range. I think it's 40 meters or so. So huge tidal range. And I wanted to show that in my work. So what I'm now doing is I'm taking either very long exposure images, even using graduated or neutral density filters at night even, so that these exposures can be 1 or 2 hours long, or I'm actually taking a series of pictures which I'm going to put together in a software program. So there might be 150 images taken over a 2-hour period, which will be blended together in a software to kind of show that process. And that's what I'm really interested in. So I think the easiest way I can describe it is that rather than using time to capture light, I'm interested in using light to capture time. So I haven't got or finalized my final PhD question yet. I'm on the way there, but I'm in this awkward stage at the moment where I think I've got more answers than I've got questions. And the PhD is actually about having a very, very specific point of research that nobody's ever done before, and that is completely original. And I can promise you, it really bends my head at times to try and get round to doing that. But I think I'm on the way there, and the PhD is practice-based, so the answer will come through the photography, I hope.
Very good. I suppose we've got a series of questions here. I'm sorry to hang on, probably about another 5 or 10 minutes, guys, if that's okay. Okay, so with that in mind, somebody's doing their A-level. They've just begun their A-level. In UK, it's kind of the 17 and 18-year-old exams and things, really. Their first year A-level, and they've taken photography, and they've got to create a long-term project. Any advice in getting started?
I think with any project, you've got to do something that you're really passionate about, because there are going to be times when it's not going to work. There are going to be times when it's going to be brilliant, it's going to work beautifully, and there are going to be times when it's not going to work. And you have to be really, really passionate about what it is that you want to photograph. You have to be prepared to kind of really push yourself. You have to be prepared to go out. You know, it might be in terrible weather. I photograph for example, for the going down the sun of this particular PhD project. I'm in the middle of nowhere, freezing to death for 3 or 4 hours at time. You know, actually longer than that. And you have to really, really be passionate to want to be able to do that. So it's something that you've got to be passionate about, and that passion will show in your work. And that's what will keep you motivated. It's what will drive you on, but you need to be really passionate. There is no specific subject area that, you know, you could undertake. It is actually your gut feeling. What is it that you're really interested in? What is it that intrigues you? What is it that kind of pushes your button? What is it that makes you want to kind of make sure that it's permanent? You know, we produce millions, billions of pictures every single day. What is it about what you want to photograph that will make your series of pictures different from the rest, that will make it mean something when it's compared to all the other stuff that's out there? And you have to have something that you really want to do. There isn't a specific subject area. It isn't portraiture or landscape or anything. It's actually, what is it you feel should be captured so the rest of the world can see it and understand it?
Brilliant. Can I add to that? Stay safe is number one. Stay safe, please. And number two is carry a camera like your sketch pad. So take whatever, don't get too hooked into the project. Allow yourself to breathe, and it allow you to refocus in on these things as well. Because around a corner could be a great idea. And if you get too focused on one thing, you'll basically forget to look at things. One of our landscape masters, Nigel Forster, says all the time, look behind you. Never forget to look behind you, because you get too focused in front of you. And I would say that it's not about the project, the one project that you're doing, but it's all the mini projects around you that you might stumble on and could take you in a different direction. But stay safe is number one with it. Okay. Sorry.
Just very quickly, one of the things that I do with PhD, you have to experiment, because you're trying to create something that nobody else has ever done before. The only way you can do that is by experimenting. So don't be afraid to fail. You know, I take a lot of pictures, and a lot of them are absolutely rubbish. And it's not hopefully because I'm a bad photographer. It's primarily because I'm trying things out, and they don't always work. And that can be particularly annoying if you spent 4 hours trying to get it. But you can learn from those mistakes. So don't be afraid to fail.
Definitely.
Try different things out and keep on going back again and again until you get what you want from it, because each time you do it, you will learn something that you can use, and ultimately it will lead to a completely different, a unique way of seeing the world.
Somebody's looking to create a series of greetings cards to sell to help fund another project. Any advice? I was thinking about when that came up. I was thinking about the guy in Bath that always has his landscapes of Bath for the tourists for sale. And as soon as somebody said that with it, any advice, Marko, on that idea?
Well, two things. One is that if you're doing it for a specific charity, then it might be an idea to actually have some form of link to that charity. So whatever you're photographing has a pertinence. Now you don't necessarily need, it's not, you don't necessarily need to do that. You can just produce a series of, say, beautiful landscapes, and the money is used, is generated and used for a charity. But if you can find a link within your work to that charity and the aims and the ambitions of that charity, they will probably be a lot more interested in working with you. So for example, the Going Down of the Sun project actually generated an awful lot of money for a charity. And the Royal British Legion are a charity, and they wanted to be involved because they could see that this particular project was going to have impact. So they actually were brilliant. They got really involved and helped out, and they actually funded part of the project. And what I did with it is I sold quite a number of the prints, and then donated the money for those sales to various organisations. And we sold postcards. When we initially started the project at Artists Vale, we sold packs of postcards of the initial images at the Artists Vale shop. And again, all the money, Artists Vale is a charity, so all the money went to Artists Vale. And the obvious thing is that make sure that it's something that is commercially viable in the context that you're working within. If you're going to put images out there, make sure that they're the kind of images that people will want to purchase, because you'll have a lot more longevity with your sales for that reason.
Somebody wants to use my image on a front cover of a local magazine. This is typical of what you've kind of touched on, I think. Any advice on how I retain my copyright?
Well, you have to retain your copyright, full stop. When I talk about the images that obviously have been magazines and so on, I own the copyright to those pictures. Nobody else owns it. It's something that's been really eroded over the last 10-15 years, especially with digital. You work for companies now and they want the copyright, and it's really frustrating because you don't get that work otherwise. But it never used to be like that. Even 15 years ago, it wasn't like that. If you're not going to get the commercial return that justifies that, never give your copyright away. You always need to retain it because you want to be able to use it more than once. And if people are going to use your image, then what are they going to give you in return? Now, obviously, it's a sensitive area. You've got to be diplomatic the way that you actually approach that answer. But you basically need to say, I'm happy for you to use it. What do I get? And it isn't necessarily just that you get the front cover. You need to make sure that that they acknowledge who you are. People need to see who that image is by. They need a link to your website. Little things like that. Maybe if they're going to use it, you could get a small advert in there for something else you're doing, or they can do an article about the work that you're doing. It doesn't have to be a huge article, but you need to try and sort of build up a kind of conversation, a discussion with these organizations, because if they just come along and use your image and then you never hear from them again, you've not gained anything from it. They've gained and you've got nothing. So be careful. You need to, you don't want to max it. You want to be subtle. You want to be intelligent about the way that you approach them about it. But you do need to make sure that they are prepared to give you something back. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount initially, but if you want to have a relationship with those people, then you need to be quite canny about it. But if you give your work away, they'll just go to somebody else the next time round. People can be very fickle.
Okay, next question. I'm wanting to create a self-print book. I've already been refused by several publishers. So I'm thinking about Kickstarter. Do you have any advice or experience?
Yes, Kickstarter is a really, really good way of doing it. But a Kickstarter campaign, you need to do an awful lot of work prior to the actual Kickstarter. You need to build up an audience of people. You need to have lots of people who already know about your work, who are interested in what you're doing, who feel that that your work is going to make a contribution to them. You need to build up an audience. You can't just put a Kickstarter out there and say, right, I've got this great idea, I want to make a book. People need to know about you before the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter is the last step, and then you need to make sure that, you know, when you get that going, you really push it. The useful thing about self-publishing is that it is actually, you don't need to go to a publisher. You can do it yourself. There are lots of companies out there who will actually print for you. And the other thing about that is you don't need to do massive print runs. You can actually do quite limited print runs and see how it goes. And it doesn't mean that you're going to spend a small fortune, and B, you're going to have lots of books in your spare room for the next 5 years. You can just print limited edition prints of books and see how it goes. But if you want to do something like Kickstarter or anything like this, develop an audience, get lots of people following you, get a blog, make sure you have a website, you know, do it on Facebook, on Instagram, use social media, connect with people, exhibit the work. It's the same as the original question about how do I get my work seen. You need to get your work seen so that you could say you have lots of people who are going to be already interested. And when you actually do the Kickstarter, it's kind of the icing on the cake.
Good. I'd add to that, just remember to deliver what you promise.
Yeah.
As far as the goods, and it's a lot of work, so make sure that you're ready to put that in to actually get it over the line as far as the finished book is concerned, and find out in advance the publishing, who's going to print for you, get some real costings in mind, and then basically double it to allow you for any changes and everything else with it. Question, not a comment really, about post-production. Funny enough, about this image on screen. How much work would go into this? How much time do you spend on it?
This one has a lot of images. Every other image that you've seen has got, they've gone through Photoshop. I open them in Lightroom. I shoot raw files. I open them in Lightroom, and then I do a little bit on curves. That's it. It's minuscule. I've actually got, I'm just about to buy a new Mac, but I have got CS2 as Photoshop, which is, I'm sure there's archaeologists digging up versions of it everywhere. You know, they'll probably find them in a Roman CS2 in a Roman ruin, but it is incredibly limited. And I don't do very much more than use that. I'm basically using the imagery in terms of post-production. It's almost like dodging and burning in a color darkroom, and that's quite limited. This picture, however, I did want to actually make it so that, you know, there were areas that were in focus and sharp, and other areas that were blurred. There's a little bit of darkening around the edge. So, you know, but I was actually out for a very specific reason, to make it look so that when people looked at the image, or when it was on the wall in the Mall in Milton Keynes, it looked as close as possible to an old master painting, just for that authenticity. But obviously it isn't. It's a two-dimensional image. It couldn't be anything other than that. But I wanted to just kind of further investigate the way that we kind of perceive and respond to pictures. So there's quite an extensive amount of Photoshop in terms of effect. However, in terms of lighting, that is how it was lit.
Very good. Iconography. a thing of the future or a thing of the past? That's a question.
I'm not the person to answer this. Probably the best person to answer this is a lovely gentleman who I hope is listening tonight, called Jerry Coe, and he's actually a fantastic iPhone photographer. I haven't got an iPhone. I'm not the kind of person who takes. I don't walk around with the camera. I don't do a picture a day or anything like that. My pictures are very, you know, I spend a lot of time conceiving them, thinking them through. You know, they're very deliberate. They're very structured, my pictures. So I don't use an iPhone. In fact, the only thing that I do is I put. I've got a Samsung phone. It's all right. It's nothing special, and I use it just to kind of click silly little pictures, primarily of my dog Lemmy, who's sat at my feet now, getting very bored. But that's pretty much what I photograph. But iPhones have come such a long way, and I know that the quality of iPhones is remarkable. And I also know that it obviously allows you very direct access to post-production and manipulation. And I have seen Jerry Coe's work, and it is absolutely fantastic. In fact, I actually have one of his pictures where we were on PTO together. I was lecturing in PTO a few years back in Mexico, and we did a swap, and I have got one of his wonderful pictures of a really strange looking Mexican bird that was at the breakfast table that we were sharing. So yeah, I use anything at all is always going to be good to use. There's no restrictions. It's just make sure that it fits with the subject matter that you're photographing.
Marko, thank you very much. Nigel says, I hope you're still continuing the shots of cheese like the French masters, but we'll leave it there because this is obviously an in-joke between the two of you. Yeah. Look, guys, Marko, first of all, thank you very much for sharing such 8 interesting images, and good luck with the PhD. As far as to get in touch with Marko, go via the site. That's markodutka.photography.com. I'm sure if you just actually do a search, you'll be able to find Marko anywhere, and basically, you know, follow what he does and everything else. We'll be interested how the PhD goes, so I'm sure you'll be back when all that's done and finished, and you'll be able to actually explain it all to us in depth and everything else with it. Thank you very, very much for sharing 8 great images, and everybody, thanks for joining us live. I'm sure the questions could have gone on for another 3 hours, to be honest, but again, really, really great, and good luck to all of you with your personal projects. There's lots of comments coming through, inspiring, can't wait to get out to take the photograph. Good idea from, they don't say who it is, but obviously the good idea from the photographer about kickstarting a prod project. Now want to self-print my own book. I'm thinking about a PhD. There's loads of things we could just go on. So again, Marko, thank you for inspiring so many who are joining us live tonight and things really, and I'm sure we'll get you back again soon. Thanks, bud.
Thank you very much, Mark.
See you all again in a few weeks' time, guys. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.